This is not a story about Trump, and it's not really about Maduro, it's about oil, and how energy still decides who has leverage and who doesn't. When global power shifts, energy always becomes political again. Sanctions, arrests, and negotiations are just surface events. The real story is who controls supply and who controls access. Every time global power appears to shift, one element quietly returns to the center of the system: energy. Not ideology, not speeches, not personalities. Energy. For decades, many believed oil had lost its central role, that technology, finance, or diplomacy had replaced it as the true engine of power. That assumption was premature. Oil never stopped being power, it simply stopped being discussed as such. Modern systems still depend on energy to function. Logistics, manufacturing, food production, military readiness, and financial stability all rely on a predictable flow of energy. When that flow is stable, energy becomes invisible. When it is threatened, it becomes political again. This is the moment the world is entering now. As global supply tightens and demand remains inflexible, energy stops being a commodity and becomes leverage. Not something to be sold, but something to be controlled. This is why oil-producing regions never truly leave the global power equation. They may be sidelined, sanctioned, ignored, but they are never irrelevant. Control over energy does not operate through ownership alone. It operates through access. Who can sell, who can buy, who can transport, who can insure, who can settle payments. Each of these layers adds friction or flexibility to the system. When access is restricted, oil loses value on paper but gains value strategically. Because scarcity shifts negotiation power. This is why moments of energy pressure reshape political behavior. Alliances soften, principles become negotiable. Previously isolated actors return to the conversation, not because they changed, but because the system needs what they hold. Oil does not care about ideology. It does not respond to morality. It responds to structure. And when the structure demands energy, power rearranges itself to secure it. This is the context that matters. Before arrests, sanctions, or negotiations make headlines, the system is already recalculating risk. Supply gaps are measured, alternatives are tested, pressure points are identified. What looks like sudden political movement is often the final step of a long structural process. Energy becomes visible again only when the system can no longer afford to ignore it. And when that happens, old assumptions break quickly. The world is not rediscovering oil. It is remembering what oil has always been: power. Sanctions are often presented as punishment, a moral response to unacceptable behavior, a way to isolate and pressure governments into compliance. That framing is convenient and incomplete. In reality, sanctions are not designed to punish. They are designed to restructure access. They don't exist to end regimes. They exist to control how systems interact with them. When a country is sanctioned, it is not removed from the global system. It is repositioned within it. Access becomes conditional, transactions become complicated, participation becomes expensive. This distinction matters. Punishment seeks correction through pain. Mechanisms seek control through dependency. Sanctions operate as filters. They decide who can trade, through which channels, and at what cost. They reshape incentives without requiring confrontation. This is why sanctions are rarely absolute. Certain flows are restricted. Others remain quietly open. Exceptions appear when pressure shifts. From the outside, this looks inconsistent. From inside the system, it is precise. Sanctions create leverage by managing scarcity and friction. They slow down activity without fully stopping it. They maintain pressure while preserving flexibility. This allows power to be adjusted rather than exhausted. For energy-producing countries, this dynamic is especially important. Oil cannot simply disappear. It can be delayed, redirected, rerouted. Sanctions don't eliminate supply. They complicate access to it. And complication is where leverage lives. As long as energy remains constrained but available, it becomes a bargaining tool. Not a solution, but a variable. This is why sanctioned oil producers often remain strategically relevant. They are sidelined, but kept within reach. The system does not isolate them completely because total isolation removes leverage. Partial integration preserves it. This is the logic behind long-term pressure. Sanctions signal control without forcing resolution. They keep options open. They allow recalibration when conditions change. When global energy pressure increases, sanctions become negotiable. Not publicly, structurally. Licenses appear. Restrictions soften. Channels reopen quietly. This is not hypocrisy. It is design. Sanctions are not moral verdicts. They are tools within a system built to manage access, not enforce justice. Understanding this is essential, because when sanctions shift, it is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that leverage is being reassessed, and energy is often the reason why. At first glance, stories involving Donald Trump and Nicolas Maduro are usually framed as political drama, strong personalities, public confrontations, ideological conflict. But within the global power system, personalities are secondary. What matters is leverage. Trump's approach to power was never primarily diplomatic. It was transactional. Pressure was applied not to change narratives, but to reshape incentives. Sanctions, threats, arrests, and negotiations were not separate actions. They were part of a single mechanism designed to compress options. In this framework, Maduro was not treated simply as a political adversary. He was treated as a node within a system, a holder of assets that were temporarily frozen, not eliminated. Venezuela's oil did not stop existing under pressure. It stopped flowing freely. And that distinction is critical. By restricting access rather than destroying capacity, the system preserved optionality. Oil production declined, infrastructure degraded, but the resource remained in place, waiting for the moment when pressure elsewhere would make it valuable again. This is how leverage is built. You don't remove assets from the board, you immobilize them. Trump's strategy was not about resolving Venezuela's situation quickly. It was about increasing the cost of inaction while keeping future paths open. Arrests, indictments, and public pressure served a signaling function. They communicated that control extended beyond borders, that access to the system was conditional and reversible. For Maduro, survival within this framework depended on endurance, not victory. Maintaining control over territory while waiting for structural conditions to change, and those conditions do change. When global energy pressure increases, when supply tightens, when alternatives become costly, previously frozen assets regain strategic relevance. At that point, leverage shifts. The same mechanisms that restricted access can reopen it, selectively, quietly, and conditionally. This is why moments that appear sudden are rarely spontaneous. They are the release phase of a long pressure cycle. Trump and Maduro are not the story. They are participants in a larger process. A system that applies pressure, waits, and then recalibrates when assets become useful again. This is how modern power operates, not by defeating opponents outright, but by managing assets over time until conditions favor release. Countries rarely return to relevance because they change. They return because the system around them does. For years, Venezuela was treated as a closed chapter, sanctioned, isolated, politically frozen. But isolation does not erase assets. It only delays their use. Venezuela never stopped holding one of the world's largest oil reserves. What changed was the system's willingness to access them. As long as global supply felt flexible, Venezuelan oil could remain sidelined. Alternatives existed. Costs were manageable. Pressure could be maintained without consequence. That balance is no longer guaranteed. As global energy markets tighten, spare capacity becomes more valuable than ideology. Risk tolerance shifts. What was once unacceptable becomes negotiable. This is how countries return to the board. Not through redemption, not through reform, but through relevance. When energy becomes a bottleneck, the system recalculates. Sanctions are reviewed. Licenses appear. Exceptions multiply. None of this requires public acknowledgement of failure. The system simply adapts. Venezuela's position is shaped by this logic. Its oil is difficult to extract, heavy to refine, expensive to transport. But difficulty does not eliminate value. It concentrates it. In moments of surplus, complexity is avoided. In moments of scarcity, complexity is tolerated. This is why Venezuela's return is conditional, fragmented, and quiet. Access is granted in parts. Flows resume selectively. Pressure remains, but is modulated. The country is not fully reintegrated, it is partially reactivated. This preserves leverage. The system does not restore full access, because full access removes control. Instead, it manages availability, increasing or decreasing it as conditions require. From the outside, this looks inconsistent. From within the system, it is precise. Venezuela's relevance today is not about its government. It is about timing. The global energy structure has shifted enough to make previously frozen assets useful again. And when usefulness returns, so does attention. This is not a sign of political forgiveness. It is a sign of structural necessity. The system does not remember grudges. It remembers constraints. And right now, energy is one of them. When viewed together, the movements around oil, sanctions, and political figures reveal something deeper than any single event. They reveal how the system actually works. Global power today is not driven by ideology, justice, or consistency. It is driven by functionality. The system does not ask whether an actor is good or bad. It asks whether an asset is usable. When conditions are comfortable, the system can afford rigidity. Rules are enforced strictly. Principles appear non-negotiable. But when pressure builds, flexibility returns. This is not hypocrisy. It is design. The global system is built to survive constraint, not to enforce morality. Its primary objective is continuity. Energy, finance, logistics, and infrastructure must keep moving. When one pathway closes, another is reopened, even if it was previously blocked. This is why moments that seem contradictory are actually consistent. Sanctions tighten until they don't. Isolation increases until relevance returns. Pressure escalates until access becomes necessary. From the outside, this looks like indecision. From inside the system, it is calibration. Trump, Maduro, and Venezuela are not exceptions to the rule. They are examples of it. They show that power today does not seek final outcomes. It seeks adjustable control. Nothing is resolved permanently. Everything is kept in a state of managed tension. This allows the system to respond to changing conditions without rebuilding itself. Assets are frozen, not destroyed. Actors are constrained, not removed. When scarcity appears, frozen assets are thawed. When pressure eases, control tightens again. This is the cycle. Understanding this cycle is essential to understanding modern global power, because it explains why yesterday's enemies can become today's partners, temporarily, and why today's relevance does not guarantee tomorrow's security. The system does not commit, it optimizes. And in a world where optimization defines power, stability belongs to those who understand how leverage is created, stored, and released. Not to those who believe the system is guided by consistency, but to those who recognize that it is guided by necessity. This story was never about Trump, and it was never really about Maduro. It was about how the system responds when pressure builds. Oil did not regain importance because of politics. Politics adjusted because oil regained importance. Sanctions, arrests, and negotiations are not contradictions. They are phases of the same mechanism. The system applies pressure, it waits, and when constraints appear, it recalibrates. This is how power is exercised today, not through permanent victories, but through adjustable control. Assets are frozen, not destroyed. Access is restricted, not eliminated. Relevance disappears until it becomes necessary again. Understanding this logic matters because it explains why yesterday's red lines fade, why old enemies return to the table, and why power rarely moves in straight lines. If you want to understand global power before headlines catch up, subscribe to World Power Explained. Here, we don't explain events, we explain the systems behind them. And in the next video, we'll explore why energy pressure is forcing major powers to rethink alliances, quietly. Because power doesn't announce itself, it moves quietly.